Hello, everyone. This is the Hanuman Healing Hour. How are you all doing tonight? I hope the listeners are doing good. We have a really, really special guest with us tonight. He is a chaplain who, well, I'm not going to tell too much of it, but he has a musical, a play, and the concept of this is just beautiful. So, without any further ado, we have Benjamin Kitchman on. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. Hanuman, I'm going to give it another try. It's Kintisch. Kintisch.
Kintisch.
It rhymes with mintish. There you go.
There
Beautiful.
you go. Okay, that's easier.
I'm
Cool, cool.
guessing you
Well,
spend a lot of time in your life explaining how your beautiful name is pronounced, so no worries.
there's a lot of times. Once I hear it like properly, and I say it a few times, I'm good. You know what I mean? So,
You're a quick study.
oh,
Glad to hear it. Well,
yeah,
thanks for
yeah,
having me on, and I so
cool.
enjoyed our initial conversation. I'm really delighted to see how this one unfolds.
Yes, definitely. That was really nice. I definitely enjoyed not only talking to you, but just doing all the looking at your musical and looking at all the things that you're doing. Um, in my history, there's a big emphasis on dealing with um, the idea, the concept, and even the practice of death, right? And I think that your musical is really just right along the lines of that type of thing. You know what I mean? Not from any type of like morbid any um, you know means by anything, but just the way that you make people have a smile, make them laugh. You know what I mean? I think that's really beautiful. Um, yeah, so
Hey,
I
thanks.
do.
Thanks for those kind words, Hanuman, and maybe we'll come back to that a little bit more later, but I'm glad it's made an impression on you.
Well, would you mind kind of just telling the audience a little bit about yourself, how you came, kind of came to this idea, maybe some of the steps that you kind of, can remember fumbling and stuff like that that people would be able to look to.
Absolutely. Yeah. So um, I like to tell people that I've had a little bit of a zigzag path in terms of my professional life.
Mm,
So I was always involved in two big areas of interest coming up, my Jewish faith
okay.
and my interest in music and related
Mm,
kinds of creative arts. So music and
yeah.
drama. So as a young person, I was into it. Very talented young singer, even considered a conservatory education. Did that for 1 year
Mm,
before transferring to just quote regular college at Brown
right.
University, where I did a Judaic studies degree. So I always had this
Okay.
twin interest in Judaic culture, my
Mm,
Judaism as I expressed it, and as my community expressed it. Um, and and then I always loved music, right? I was a talented singer and I had this skill to sing beautifully and to move people with my voice. So for all of my life, I've tried to find ways to use my singing for enjoyment for myself and
okay.
pleasure and inspiration for others. Um,
Right, right,
so that's a little thumbnail of my career, which
right,
included training to become a cantor, as well as working as a music teacher along the way, a cantor, an education director. And as it pertains to tonight's conversation and the hospice musical, I became a hospice chaplain along the way. Um,
right.
the story behind that was real simple. I had become a congregational cantor, that's a music minister in a Jewish synagogue, and I found that a lot of our congregants were rather elderly,
Mm,
meaning that there was going to be a lot of hospital visits and maybe hospice visits, certainly a lot of bereavement support
yeah.
leading up to and after funerals and whatnot. And I felt a little bit out of my league. It's just seemed like a lot. And so I thought to myself, I think I'm going to need some chaplaincy training. And I
Mm,
found a great program where the home base was at a residential hospice. And so we had
Okay.
a class once a week, a sort of graduate level style training. And chaplaincy, for all of you listening, if you don't know the term, a chaplain is like a religious professional who is almost therapist adjacent, but let's say provides spiritual care to people in their time of need. Famously in MASH, there was a priest, so he was the Catholic chaplain for that platoon of soldiers. Usually in big hospitals, you'll have one, if not a whole group of chaplains on staff. So if someone is killed, God forbid, in a car crash, and the mother is bereft in the emergency room, she can say, "I want to speak to a chaplain," right? And in her moment of crisis, a religious person will come and help her. So that's what a chaplain is. And in hospice care, a chaplain does a lot of work, of course, supporting those seriously ill and dying, as well as their loved ones. So the main ministry is what we would call patient support and support of loved ones.
Okay.
But then beyond when people die, chaplains, especially if you're working full-time at a hospice, a chaplain might also be involved, say, with a grief support group or running a quarterly community memorial service, right? So it's not only the one-on-one bedside visits and so forth that a chaplain does. They sometimes do community education or community events and so forth. But the majority of the work of a chaplain, to be clear, is private. It is one-on-one or one-on-two if you've got a loved one and a plus one next to the bed.
Right.
And in my musical, what I was inspired to do, I had these beautiful visits bedside, and I was hearing stories from people. And if they weren't talking, I would hear stories from their loved ones. So one night driving home, I called up my wife. I said, "Honey, I think these stories, they want to be songs."
Oh,
And she said, without missing a beat, "Get writing tonight." So that night I got one of those black and white. Yeah, I got one of those black and white composition books, like the kids have in school. That's my
Yep.
preferred vessel for songwriting. So I got one. What's that?
I'm the same way, to be
Nice.
honest.
That's
I have
beautiful.
one right here.
Nice. Yeah. So I got one out and I started writing the song that would become "Will It Still Snow When I'm Gone," which is, I think, one of the best songs in the show.
Yeah.
I borrowed the title from a poem written by my mother-in-law, but the concept of the song came to me rather quickly. I mean, again, loosely inspired by the poem, but
Right.
the idea is a person dreaming about life after their life has ended. So the hook, "Will It Still Snow When I'm Gone," it's like if you're dying in summer and you think to yourself, "I'm never going to see winter again. Is it going to still be snowing after I die?"
Snow. Yep. Yeah.
And I think a lot of I've shared this song over the years with different groups, and people usually find it rather moving. And I think part of it is it expresses a really central truth for people. There's so much uncertainty about our death and our mortality, what happens to us when we go, and all of that. And I'll tell you that if the main task of a chaplain in hospice care is to provide spiritual support, the main cause of spiritual distress is deeply complicated feelings about mortality and death and dying, both among the people in the bed, and oftentimes the plus ones or twos or threes. Right? Sometimes I remember many times over meeting with a couple where the person who's dying is a lot healthier about their mortality than the loved one who's clutching their hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when that's happening, a lot of times the biggest job of the chaplain and the social worker and the nurses is to try to get the plus one, the loved one, to get to a
Mhm.
place of a little bit healthier acceptance so that
Right.
they can say the magic words, it's okay if you need to go.
Right.
Um, it's surprising to people to hear, but yes, I've heard this over and over and over again. People kind of holding on until given permission by the right person, and then they let go and they die.
Right. I was actually going to ask, so in your opinion, do you see that when the family is in distress about it, the person tries to hold on longer?
Um, so I've I've not observed that firsthand, but I
Okay.
think it is a known phenomenon that a dying person can ease into their death
Mhm.
when they are comfortable in
Right.
terms of managing symptoms, as well as they're comfortable with the fact of it, right?
Right. Yeah.
The
They're
you know, the
accepting.
famous that's right, acceptance is the magic word for sure. So the famous stages of grief that everyone talks about, that Dr.
Right.
Kubler-Ross wrote about, a lot of people don't know, but the initial version of her writing actually had to do with observing sick and dying people. So those stages were originally observed in seriously ill people who were going through those stages, including ultimately, it's not resolution, but it's like reconciliation and acceptance. So how do you get there? You get there by saying to yourself, like, okay,
Hmm.
here we are, and and
Yeah.
and I'm here, and I'm gonna be dying now. And like those words
Yeah.
sound rather simple and maybe even a little bit flippant as I say it that
Uh,
way, but it's really I remember you and I were chatting a little bit in our pre-call. I sort of paraphrased some Buddhist wisdom and I giggled
yeah.
because I was paraphrasing it by adding too many words because I'm not Buddhist. I just say too many words
Right.
to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um but the wisdom is right there, that's all about acceptance with where you are and who you are in that
Mhm.
moment.
Right.
Um,
And what's going on in that exact moment. Right.
say again?
And what is like recognizing the reality of what's going on in the exact moment, right? You're aware that, okay, yes, now I'm dying, I'm sick, and I'm about to not be here anymore. And you really have to do that kind of as a, okay, this is what's going on thing, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. And like the one of the songs in the full length version of the play is basically a
Mhm.
painful anthem of acceptance. Um,
Right.
and it goes, I am here now. I don't know how. I am dying, so I'm trying to be here now.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a real heartbreaker because it's sung by a young man early in the play who
Okay.
dies even before intermission.
Oh.
And but for him and for so many people like him in real life, not just the fiction version on stage, but
Mm.
there's this very upsetting reality if you are a youngish person,
Right.
someone who is perceived as strong or healthy, who is all of a sudden stricken with a disease,
Yeah.
and you're like, "It doesn't make sense. I was healthy." I Let me tell you a funny version of this. So when I did
Okay.
my chaplaincy training 2nd year, I worked at an old age home. I
Okay.
guess they call it elder care facility now. Old age would be
Yeah.
like passé.
Yeah.
Elder care
Yeah.
facility, and one of the floors I worked was a rehab floor. So this would be
Okay.
older people who fell, most often broke their hip or a
Right.
serious leg break, so much so that they need a major surgery, and then they need to be in a rehab bed, like a hospital bed, for a few days, if not even a few weeks, because breaking a hip is really serious. So time and time again, I'd have conversations with people where it was like, I felt great. So it would be like some person in a hospital bed telling me, I was talking a little bit about some of the
the
meditative
hospice
moments
experience.
of hospice
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
right. So and just being injured, right. So
Mhm.
the funny story is all these people who I met who were telling me, despite appearances to the contrary, that they felt like young older people, and they had just been playing
Right.
tennis or been on a cruise a week earlier, and everything was good until they broke their hip. And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, that happened, and that's awful. And here we are,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And honestly, that
Yep.
sometimes that phrase, "here we are," is so important and so painful. So the song I described from my play
Right.
was this young kid who was struggling with the very fact of him being stuck in this bed. And
Mm.
it's a real tearjerker of a song, but anyone can relate who's ever been ill when they wanted to be healthy, missing out on things, even
Right.
if it's not life-threatening. Um,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
the last time I had a very serious injury, it was a snowboard crash. Thank God I only wrecked my elbow,
Mm.
because that can go real bad. Um,
Yeah.
but holy crap, I missed out, a month of teaching a job that I loved at the time,
Mhm.
and I missed out, obviously, the rest of the snowboard season. And when I
Mhm.
talked to the chaplain at the time, she heard me kind of minimize my suffering, and she said, "Listen,
Right.
you're in a lot of pain physically because you've got this terrible broken arm and you're going to get the surgery,
Mm.
and you're
Mm.
dealing with disappointment, which is its own kind of loss." And I was like, "Oh, this was, by the way, one of the moments where I saw the magic of good chaplaincy work. That it's not just
Right.
going in, being quiet, and saying a prayer, but it's really interaction,
Right.
teasing out kind of the important themes of a person's story, especially if they are themes
Mhm.
of suffering or distress. And
Right.
then the chaplain style is at the end of the meeting or at the end of the visit to offer a prayer. And if the person takes it, to use what we call spontaneous prayer, meaning made up on the spot
Okay.
prayer, to lift up
Right.
what the person has said in a way that is prayerful, like literally in the
Mhm.
structure of a prayer, but also makes the person in the room feel like their concerns have been heard and have been elevated with that sort of magical. I mean,
Right.
I call it the magical special holy sauce. Um, like, if you and I have a meal together and we enjoy the
Mm.
bread, it'll be a nice experience. But if we pause for a moment and say a blessing over the bread, as some Jewish people do, and we thank God
Mm.
for all the miracles involved in the creation of the bread, like, it might bring us to a slightly more elevated place.
Right.
It might. I don't know if it will. But those
No.
customs and those prayers, I think they do offer potential for us to have moments where we're just a little bit closer to some sort of holy
To
plane.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
that's
agree.
part of the holy work of the chaplain is to offer
Right.
prayerful moments and to offer a little bit of respite and relief for those suffering, those in pain.
Mm. Yeah, and I really agree. A lot of the stuff you were talking about, especially the being in the now, like what you were quoting from your song, um, that actually comes the way it comes to me is through one of my teachers, Ram Dass. He's a yogi and Hindu and all this other stuff, and his literal saying, for lack of a better term, is be here now, right? He got really popular off of that and everything. And really it's telling you, just like you were saying, if you're even starting to go towards that place, right, of not being on this level anymore, you start to understand that really all the other stuff that was going on does not matter, because right now you're about to be leaving. And I don't know, maybe you can kind of expand on it, but it seems to me that people have a hard time sometimes with allowing the reality that they're stuck to, that, like, I'm a grandmother, I'm a grandfather, things like that, hinder them from kind of moving on peacefully, safely, whatever you want to call it, right? So I don't know if maybe you've seen a lot of things like that.
Yeah, well, you're identifying, or you highlighted how people as patients, they bring to the hospital bed or hospice bed
Hmm.
different identities, and those
Right.
identities, if I'm getting your question right, imply obligation and,
Hmm.
I guess, in a certain sense, a covenantal relationship back and forth with the loved ones, most famously with
Right.
spouses. It's so
Right.
hard.
Right.
I've ministered in my chaplaincy role to a lot of beautiful spouses who love their person so much and struggled so
Hmm.
mightily to let go.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it's the person in the bed who's struggling mightily to let go. I alluded earlier in my comments to how often it is the plus one who's having such a hard time being ready to
Right.
let go. Um,
Right.
but whoever it is, yes, um, an acceptance of the reality, including a bleak prognosis, is essential. I mean, I
Hmm.
haven't given you, I gave you a definition of chaplaincy, so I might as well throw in the one
Right.
for hospice. Hospice is a a medical care or that is provided for people at the end of their lives after
Yeah.
two doctors have concluded they have 6 months or fewer to live. So you can't get into
Okay.
hospice care just for being old. And you can't go to
Right.
hospice care, say, after you've got a gunshot wound to the chest after a robbery, right? Hospice is very specific for certain kinds of
Mhm.
basically slow-moving terminal diseases, cancer most famously,
Okay.
but I've helped people with Parkinson's, I've helped people with Alzheimer's, um, congenital heart failure, which is
Right.
often coded as dying of old age, but and the body breaks down. That's often congenital heart failure. But
Right.
those are the biggies. I mean, cancer is really the sort of king or queen of what puts people into hospice care. What I
Mhm.
do in my play through the magic of theater, people are able to tell their stories and then break into song, kind of like chorus
Okay.
line, where people do a monologue and make it musical and share it through song and
Mhm.
dance. So I do that kind of
Mhm.
magic move throughout the play, both for a bunch of solo songs and some duets and ensemble pieces as well.
Okay.
Um, and then there's some songs that are not drawn directly from the stories coming out of the bed. There's
Right.
songs about the relationships, there's songs about dealing with grief or dealing with hope, finding hope in the face of grief and
Right.
so forth. So we try to cover a lot of that material in a lot of different
Mhm.
ways.
Very cool. Yeah, I was looking at like looking through your website, but I was also looking at the little preview that you guys have on YouTube. And that was really, it was very nice to see, like I said earlier, see somebody giving some joy to what is normally in people's minds, a negative situation.
Yeah, for sure.
How did you kind of come about understanding the that it's a very complex idea to understand that it doesn't have to be a it doesn't have to be a horrible situation, right? So how did you kind of come to the understanding yourself that you can move on, and it's probably even healthier to move on while you're joyful, while you're content, while you're happy? How did you realize that?
Well, for me, my connection to hospice goes way back to my youth, in an
Mm,
indirect way. My beloved grandfather, Bernie, may he rest in peace, or may his memory be for a blessing, as the Jews like to say. He died after sustaining an injury in a fall that I witnessed, which was a terrible thing to
oh,
watch.
okay.
And then he was
Hmm.
hospitalized for 8 or 9 months, leading to his death. And what happens for so many old people, they got hospitalized after one small injury, and then one injury becomes a bigger injury. And instead of things
It
healing,
just
things kind of,
compounds.
that's
Yeah,
right, they snowball. And
yeah, yeah.
this was not just a family member, a grandfather who I was fond of, but in his younger years, he had worked for the Parcel Post. That was the historical antecedent to to UPS back when, before
Okay.
UPS was invented, and the postal service
Right,
did all the
right.
packages. So my grandpa was
Oh,
like,
wow.
in his pictures from his youth, he was a very strong, muscly guy, right? And
Hmm.
I think we were all kind of proud of him for being this hardworking, strong guy, not just physically
Mm,
strong, but sort of took care of his community, working class New York City neighborhood, and he was the postal guy. And like,
right, right.
I I've always observed that, yes, people of all genders are proud, can be hopefully proud of their bodies and so forth. But there
Hmm.
is a particular thing to the cisgender hetero man, as he's like talking about work and talking about,
Yeah,
doing stuff with his
yeah.
body. And I'm totally like that. Like, I'm a guy's guy. I love, this afternoon I was working in the front yard and raking, like a manual rake,
Right.
not in any way efficient. It like kicks the crap
Right.
out of your body. It's so difficult, but it's also like
Yeah.
really, really rewarding when you rake a section of your yard like that. And like,
Yeah.
kind of love the
It's
feeling.
satisfying.
Very satisfying, right. So anyway, like, Bernie was held up as a paragon of both physical strength and being,
Mm,
a beloved member of the community. People just loved him.
okay.
So when he
Yeah.
died, people came out of the woodwork to attend his funeral and the memorial service. There was so
Mm,
much love for this guy in, from whatever, Rockaway, New York City, where he'd lived and worked for so much time.
mm,
But also, I think part of the sadness in watching his decline had been how this sort of beast of a man had been so diminished. And I think
right.
a lot of us who have, whether your loved one was physically impressive when they were younger or not, injury and
Mm,
illness and death takes a real toll on a healthy person, says
yeah.
Captain Obvious here. So, like, I remember the feeling of watching Grandpa Bernie diminished over these many months, where we would go into New York City to see him in the hospital. And
Mm,
unfortunately, that it really um it, it, it was devastating for my father to watch. And
right.
he really suffered having seen this, and not able to, part of
Mm,
the pain for a lot of people. We were talking a moment ago about acceptance, right? So when you're
yeah.
the loved one watching your beloved in that bed, getting
Mm,
worse instead of getting better, losing their memory or their cognition, like, there's a real feeling of helplessness, a real feeling of I've heard a lot of people talk about being lost at sea. People are really feeling feelings when they slip into metaphors. I talk in metaphors all the time because I'm a playwright and a songwriter. But like when regular civilians start talking in metaphors, they're having some sort of deep experience, right? And one of the metaphors that's really common in chaplaincy, or just people in distress, they talk about being in the wilderness.
Right.
And
being kind of in a not so much a void, but like a very empty space. Like there's just a lot of stuff, but none of it's there. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter.
That's one way. That's one way to understand the wilderness. For those of you who are biblical scholars, for the Israelites, being in the wilderness was 40 years of traveling without getting where they wanted to go. So when we find ourselves in the wilderness, metaphorically, it could be that in-between space. Some people think about serious illness, aging, and death as moving between one place and the so-called promised land. A lot of my favorite African-American spirituals talk about crossing over River Jordan to get to the promised land. Whatever the metaphor is, the chaplain's job is to sit with the person and invite them to be comfortable in their prayerful moment, in their moment of anxiety, even if that's where they're feeling, and try to get to somewhere approaching peace.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I have personal experience with death, with my parents and things like that. And for me, it was realizing that they wanted to be remembered, not so much as how they were when they were passing or when they passed, but how my interaction with them the whole time was. You know what I mean? So like when, for example, my mother died, I was young and it took me a long time to deal with that type of grief. But what ended up happening was I realized she would want me to live a great life and have a whole bunch of, dreams and things for me. And my best way of remembering her and allowing her to be at peace is to just do the best I can and see where those dreams go.
That's a wonderful way to honor her memory.
Yeah. And it's for me, that's, the ability to just realize, like you were saying, that even though that moment is past, this moment right now is the same moment as before. I just get to choose what I'm thinking about it a little bit differently. You know what I mean? So I just kind of allow what's going to happen. Yeah, and it's an interesting way of living, I guess I'll say. But yeah. So, but I do want to ask you a little bit more. So the play, are you doing performances again yet?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, we're in an exciting time right now. It's I guess we can say we're making connections, we're making plans, and we're doing some small performances in people's homes. I'm actually planning a couple of mini tours for next spring. One's going to be in and around Chicago, with appearances with some family who are there, with a synagogue that's there, and I'm hoping to add a few more. And there will also be a New England appearance, Boston, and some of the communities around there. That'll also be next summer. I've got appearances locally in the meantime, and I want to let your listeners know that if you find the conversation about this topic interesting, if you check out the website and you like what you see, there's a form where you can fill out, and be in touch with me. The cool thing about the one-man version of the musical that I created during COVID, it was a condensed version of a longer ensemble play. That one-man show, while it was created at a time that I just needed to make something short and make it fit on the computer screen, it turns out it was a real godsend, because now I've been able to perform this work at a Fringe festival. I was at Asheville Fringe last spring, and that was wonderful to bring it to live audiences. And Captain Obvious here again says it's simpler to bring my one-man show to a given place or appearance than it is to arrange a whole ensemble cast. So there's some nice possibilities there. So if you're listening and you love theater, the dream is to partner with a small or medium-sized theater to stage the work in some kind of way in the coming year or two. But short of that, I'm happy to make appearances for whoever would be happy to have me, and that includes schools, institutions of higher learning, healthcare places that do trainings, cultural entities of all types, synagogues, churches, mosques. Be in touch, and I'd be happy to tell you more about the project and how we can learn and share together.
And do you mind kind of just talking about the what the website is, or any your social medias?
Happy to share about that. Yeah, so the website is lifereviewmusical.com, LIFEREVIEW musical.com. Instagram at Life Review Musical, and I'm pretty active there. The website is great because when you land there, there's right on the landing page is that trailer video that you were talking about. So if you're curious, listening to me talk, and you want to see and hear a bit more, that trailer video is going to show you lots. And you can also explore our rather long and winding road of creating this project. We're now 10 years running, so it's something of a study in persistence. But despite that, I'm really excited to be making plans now for a November house concert and traveling out to Chicago and Boston next spring and summer. So it has taken a really, really long time to get to this point. And of course, COVID did slow things down. Like it did for everyone in theater and music. But, there's been some unexpected blessings. I think that's a different kind of a Buddhist teaching about how pain and suffering can be a teacher. And for me, I actually went on a podcast where the entire topic was adversity and going through adversity. And I framed the whole conversation about how much struggle it was to have this play, the dream kind of taking off and then shut down by COVID. And it really was. I mean, I felt kind of heartbroken. I mean, I didn't see when everything shut down, of course, like everyone, I didn't see the possibilities that were there in front of me on the laptop. Just didn't have the imagination yet. But boy, once I was able to get through it, not only did I create this one-man show version, I was able to perform it 10 times, including one benefit performance that raised some nice money for my project and a charity.
Very nice.
And one appearance that I felt rather sentimental about, it was the large Jewish elder care facility where I had done chaplaincy training. So they brought in the work and they kind of piped it in through their their like local access cable system inside the residence. So all these hundreds of residents were able to see the show in their room, which was special for me to know about. But there's lots of different ways, again, because of we were laughing before about how the people in the bed don't want to be in the bed, and
Yeah.
painful and frustrating, and you can't be anywhere but the bed. And
Right.
I think I'm sitting from this space that is my basement office. It became, of course, my basement classroom when I was full-time teacher teaching quarantine.
Hmm.
And I've got the fancy mic set up so I could do blah, blah, blah. But like, I remember the feeling of not wanting to be here. And even when I did those performances, it was nice to perform, right? But like, of
Right.
course, I would have preferred to be live and in person. Of course. No one
Yeah.
wanted to
Yeah.
be stuck at home. No one wanted to be scared of
Yeah.
the virus, but we were living
Right.
through that. And
Yeah. That's one thing we all have gone through. You know what I mean?
correct. We all went through that time together.
Yeah.
And you know, I mentioned in passing the Asheville Fringe appearance. It was so exhilarating to be live in person, even though it was like a kind of a small venue. It was perfect for who I was out of
Right.
town. 30 or 40 people like laughing when they're supposed to laugh and crying when they're supposed to cry and cheering on their feet at the end. Like that just felt
Yeah.
so good for me in my heart, and what a nice boost for the project. I think all of us who have been apart from one another, we've had these moments when we're back together in person, face to face, and it just makes all the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few people that I've recently got to see that I haven't been able to see in, say, about 3 years now, just shortly before everything happened. We just finally, and that feeling is there. You know what I mean? That feeling of whatever the heck just happened, but all right, where are you at? Like you want to be there for them almost instantaneously.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, I really enjoyed chatting with you, and I hope that you'll come back on and everything, and maybe in a little while we could find somewhere down here for you to come and perform. So
remind me where you're
down in old
located,
sunny
Hanuman.
down in sunny Florida.
All right. I gotta be honest. I've got some mixed feelings about Florida, but
yeah, it's a rough state.
you're trying to bring the peace to there, so that's good. I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah.
Bring a little peace and love to where things are a little bit hairy. But yes,
yeah,
I would love
crazy.
to bring my work to Florida or wherever else people are interested in having me. And I do hope that its message, we were talking a lot about acceptance, and that is the work that may be the most difficult for the patients and the loved ones, right? But here's something that is less difficult that we can all work on with sincerity and with open hearts, and that's being present. No matter how about this, while acknowledging that the hospice in particular and the hospital and the nursing home more broadly, these are places that no one really wants to be. Let's be honest.
Right.
We all wish we could stay healthy and young forever. And no one wants grandma away in a home. But sometimes she needs to be because she can't care for herself, or she's losing her memory or whatever, right? But like there they are. And so what we can do, we cannot stop time. We cannot reverse the effects of aging, despite the claims of expensive creams and so forth. They really, I think they mostly work on the power of suggestion and moisturizer.
Well, you don't think Neuralink's going to fix all that? No, I'm just kidding. But I agree with you, though.
But that thing about acceptance, about being where we are and being okay with it, it's for the person who's going through that aging or illness or dying journey and their loved ones. And, this can be a very, very complicated journey. So what is the easy thing? Despite or slightly easier thing. If not arriving at acceptance, it's arriving at bedside. There we go. It's showing up.
There you go.
Right? You don't have to be deep and spiritual like the chaplain, that's their job. If you want to like do a little
Right.
praying, great. If you want to just put on some
Right.
groovy music, or if you play a musical instrument, bring it and play it at the hospital or the nursing home or the hospice. People will be so happy. If you sing
Yeah.
a song or a few, people will be so happy.
Yep.
So that joy that you bring through music and the quiet serenity you bring through your presence, that is a true blessing that you can share with others in their time of need. And
Yeah.
I encourage people to be brave about it. Maybe if you're listening and you hear me say blah, blah, blah hospice or blah, blah, blah visiting a nursing home, if you're younger than say 50, you might be like, heebie jeebies.
Right.
No, thank you. I'm going to catch like death and dying. First of all,
Yeah.
the stuff that gets you into a hospice or nursing home, it's generally not communicable. If you've got something that you can actually catch, it's hard to get visitors.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
and
yeah.
the thing is, like, it's not about you, it's about them. And that's, I mean, honestly, a lot of what we do in life to help other people is slightly uncomfortable or slightly inconvenient for us. I mean, I recently, a few weeks ago, a dear beloved friend of mine died, a music teacher of an older generation, but something of a father figure. Called him periodically to talk about music teaching and would always visit him when I went home to town. I'm bringing him up because, his death did not occur at a particularly convenient time, as deaths
Right.
never do. But I dropped
Right.
everything to go to my hometown and be at this funeral, be at the memorial service and all that. And I was talking about it, getting ready to go, all distraught, talking with my wife about it. And one of the things I said, I was like, funerals and memorial services, they kind of stink. No one really likes them, but we need them. The people who are surviving, like, it's not for the person who's going in the ground. Unless you literally think, if you literally believe in like ghosts and that the person is floating over that memorial service, then okay, maybe if that's your belief system, and I'm not poo-pooing it, if that's your belief system, then the memorial service is also for the dead person. But if your belief system does not include like some sort of sentient, paying attention, ghostly
being there
at
after,
the service, right? Then they're not there, and then the service is really just for the survivors. The service, and honestly, I should say, since I'm bringing it up, I want the listeners to know that this was one of the most beautiful memorial services I've ever been to, and I've been to a lot in my day. Mostly because this was a musician who had many beautiful music friends playing some really incredible stuff. Some classical, some jazz, some singing, just wonderful. And when it ended, they did one of those New Orleans style marching band lines where they had the brass playing and everyone danced around. And then it was done, and then it was quiet, and then people cried more. But it was still so joyful and so, expressive. We can't all get that kind of send off, but I do believe that having people you love and then having them die can have a wake up call kind of effect. It feels a little bit cliche to say, but there's a reason why the near-death experience is known to have like a shock you back to life kind of effect for a lot of people. I just missed getting killed in that car crash, and now I got to do something. Not always, but a lot of times people get kind of jolted. And I've been at this music teaching game long enough that I don't know that I need a jolt per se, but this was a man who lived to the hilt, but not for the finer things or the pleasures of life. Certainly he enjoyed beautiful artwork, and he enjoyed music and tasty food. But he mostly lived life for the benefit of others. A major force in community service. He got public housing built in a posh part of the Hudson River Valley where it's very hard to get, because he believed in affordable housing. And he gave food to homeless people in New York City, and on, like just amazing work. So for me, that part of the message of his life was to use your days with wisdom, and see how much you can fill in there, because there's so much hurt and pain in the world, and when you bring joy and love to people authentically, as I can picture him doing to this day. I remember all the way back to high school when I went with him on these trips to New York to meet homeless people in the middle of the night and give them lunches and warm clothes and stuff. And when he did these mini trainings, he'd say, yeah, it's important to give everyone the food and the clothes, but the most important thing is to say hello and shake hands and introduce yourself, because these are real people. They're real people who happen to be down on their luck, so they're living on the street, but they're real people. That message is so important as we navigate the world and we encounter the other, as we encounter those who are suffering with poverty or illness or injury, that we remember that despite whatever feelings of disgust or revulsion we may have, maybe they're unkempt or a little bit messy, dirty, to also remember they are but an imperfect reflection of a holy God. They are a walking version of an angel. We just forget to notice it.
The way I practice that, the way I see that is, not only do I see them as the reflection of God and other astral, spiritual things, but I also see them as a reflection of myself, right? Because there's a Bible scripture, and I don't know the exact where at, but it's, for the grace of God, there go I. And I learned that when I was in recovery. And that's one thing that really stuck with me, was that if it wasn't for maybe something that God is doing right now in my life, there's where I could be. So why would I want to treat that person any worse than I would want to be treated? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of the aforementioned zigzags, and sometimes a zigzag into a ditch off of the road. So I'm glad, despite all that, you've made it this far and made it healthy and in relatively one piece. How do you like to wrap up these beautiful conversations, my friend?
Well, usually just the standard, asking for all your contact info, just kind of briefly again, and then we'll cut out after that.
That sounds good. Well, if you guys want to get in touch with me, my website is lifereviewmusical.com. Again, that's life, L-I-F-E, review, R-E-V-I-E-W, musical, musical.com. That's all one word. And when you jump on there, you'll see a terrific trailer video. There's also a form you can get in touch. We've got a nice history, an oral history of the project, all 10 years of it. And we'd love to hear from you on Instagram at Life Review Musical. And again, you can message me there. And I would love to hear from you, folks.
We'll also include those links in the description and everything, so that they're a little more easily accessible too.
Thank you for being high tech and helpful, both things.
Yeah, I try. I don't know so much about the high tech, but try to be helpful. So, but definitely thank you so much for coming on.
It's been a real joy.
Well,
and a blessing.
and I hope you have a great evening. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks so much for the conversation. God bless. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
You too. God bless. Bye.